lighter than air. Introduction. You've probably seen a fire and noticed how smoke rises. You've also probably had a balloon with a string to keep it from floating away. You may have even seen a blimp flying over a stadium. Have you wondered why these things float? It's because they are lighter than air. Early days. More than 2 centuries ago, a man named Joseph Montgolfier was watching a fire in his fireplace. He began to wonder what made the smoke and sparks rise up the chimney. He decided the burning fire must create a gas of some kind. He called this gas Montgolfier gas. Then he tried an experiment. He made a bag out of silk and held the open bottom over a fire. Sure enough, when he let go, the bag began to rise into the air. Later, Joseph and his brother made a bag of cloth and paper that was nearly 20 meters around. When they filled it with Montgolfier gas from a large fire, it rose over 1,080 meters in the air and traveled more than 1.6 kilometers in the air. In their next demonstration, they attached a basket to the bag and sent a rooster and a ship into the air. These were the very first aircraft passengers in history. Soon after that, in 1783, two other Frenchmen became the first humans to fly in a balloon. Their flight lasted 25 minutes and they landed more than 8 kilometers from where they started. When some farmers saw the balloon come down in their field, they were so frightened that they attacked it with pitchforks and tore it to pieces. Kinds of balloons. The silk balloons mentioned previously were the first hot air balloons. Today, hot air ballooning is a very popular sport all over the world. Today's balloons are much safer than the ones the Montgolfiers knew. They use propane gas powered burners to heat the air, and the pilot can adjust the size of the burner's flame to make the balloon go up and down. Scientists also use gas-filled balloons to study the weather. Small balloons filled with gases such as helium or hydrogen that are lighter than air carry instruments used to study and predict the weather. Other balloons are much larger and are able to reach altitudes of 37 kilometers or more, almost to the edge of space. They carry equipment for studying the atmosphere and for observing objects in space. One of the last great challenges of ballooning has been to fly a balloon around the world. Many attempts have been made at this very difficult feat. Bad weather, fuel shortages, and technical problems forced an early to end to all of the flights. Many distance and time records were set, but nobody had been able to circle the Earth. Finally, in 1999, Burton Pickard of Switzerland and Brian Jones of Britain did it. Steering. One drawback of balloon travel is that balloons can't be steered. They go wherever the wind takes them. Balloon pilots have control over altitude, and they can make the balloon go up and down to find winds blowing in different directions. But they are not able to steer the balloon in a particular direction. Almost as soon as balloons were invented, people started to think of ways to steer them or make them dirigible. Today, any lighter than air vehicle can be steered. Is called a dirigible. In 1852, a Frenchman named Henry Giffard made the first powered flight in history when he flew his dirigible 27.4 kilometers and landed safely. His dirigible was powered by a steam engine of his own design. His engine produced 3 horsepower, about as much as a modern day lawnmower, but his engine was too weak to fly the dirigible against the wind. Almost 40 years passed before the gasoline engine finally provided the power needed for use of dirigible. A brief history of airships. The Zeppelin. Perhaps the most important person in the history of lighter-than-air flight was Count Ferdinand Graf von Zeppelin. He had long dreamed of a way to navigate the skies the way ships navigate the water. Von Zeppelin became convinced that an airship with a rigid framework could be made strong enough to be useful. The framework could be covered with fabric and support the weight of the engines for passengers and cargo. Inside the framework would be cells containing the lifting gas. He chose hydrogen because it's the lightest gas. It was also very explosive, so it had to be used very carefully. He named his invention the Zeppelin. He was a huge dirigible, often known as a rigid airship. Count von Zeppelin was a military officer who imagined using a fleet of military zeppelins as scouts and bombers, but he failed to interest the military in his invention. Instead, he raised money from private donations and spent a large amount from his own fortune. In 19 the Count flew his first airship, the Luftschiff Zeppelin 1 or LZ-1. The LZ-1 made only 3 flights before the Count ran out of money and had to dismantle it. 5 years passed before he could raise money for another ship. Despite its short career, the LZ-1 proved that the Zeppelin could work. The first line. 9 years after LZ-1, Count von Zeppelin still had not convinced the military that airship could be useful in war. He realized he would need another source of money if he wanted to build more Zeppelins. So in 1909, he formed a company called Delac to buy airships and carry passengers between German cities. The Delac airships served delicious food and fine champagne while passengers sat in comfortable watching the countryside below. By 1914, Delac had carried more than 34,000 passengers and flown roughly 160,000 kilometers without any problems. The Great Graph. In September of 1928, an enormous new airship was pulled from her hangar for the first time. The ship was named Graf Zeppelin in honor of the Count, who was still thought of as a national hero in Germany. Nobody had ever seen anything like the Graf. She was 236 meters long, longer than three 747 jetliners and almost as long as the Titanic. In 1927, an airplane had struggled to fly across the Atlantic. 1 year later, the Graf Zeppelin could carry 20 passengers across the ocean in luxury matches only by the finest ocean liners. The Graf Zeppelin caused a huge sensation wherever she went. In the 1920s, many people had ever seen an airship or even an airplane. People were struck when they saw a silver ship the size of a skyscraper sail over their heads. They rushed out of their houses and gathered by the thousands wherever the Graf landed. The Graf Zeppelin made irregular passenger flights to and from Germany. In 1929, the Graf made a 12-day voyage around the world. She also helped explore the Arctic and made the first passenger flight between Europe and South America. The Graf flew until 1937, but after that she was made into a museum. But when World War II began, the Nazi government of Germany had her melted down to use the metal to make fighter planes.